Today, we are beginning once again the season of Advent. It's a season of waiting for God's revelation, a season of longing for things to be different, a season of anticipating what is yet to come, a season of watching for the light to come, a season of expecting once again the coming of the Messiah into the world, a season of preparing for the special birth of the baby Jesus that is almost at hand. So it's odd then that on this first Sunday of Advent, our scripture texts have no hint of this special day that we call Christmas, but rather lean into a totally different day altogether. These texts focus on the apocalyptic day, at a day that we do not know, someday in the future. The text from Matthew focuses on the unknown time when Christ will suddenly return and lives will be unexpectedly and surprisingly changed. And the text from Isaiah gives a vision of the last days when all the nations will stream to the mountain of the Lord. A day when disputes will be settled, swords will be beaten into plowshares, and there will be no more war. This eschatological vision for some day in the future when God's restored vision is complete. And so for this day, we wait. So here at the beginning of Advent, we start by looking at the end. I imagine that this is an important starting place for any kind of restoration project. We begin by envisioning how a particular item, whatever it is, will look like when the restoration is done. I'm always amazed at the pictures of an old piece of furniture that goes from looking worn out, scratched up, and painted over, becoming a beautifully restored piece of fine furniture. Someone has taken the time and patience to strip away all the layers of paint, fix what is broken, sand all the surfaces, and refinish the wood to its former glory. As the restorer diligently works, she is envisioning what it will look like at the end and works towards that goal. As I've been sorting through old photos from my parents, I found pictures once again of the restoration that my dad did on a Ford Model A. The pictures at the beginning show an array of rusty pieces of metal with little resemblance of a car. I imagine that as my dad worked, he looked at pictures or had pictures in his mind of what it should look like when he was finished. And as he worked week by week and month by month, he was envisioning the end, a complete running car. You know, even in my theology class in seminary, we began with the study of eschatology, which is the study of the end times. We didn't start at the beginning with creation and work our way forward. We started with a vision of where things will end, in order to understand the rule of God in all its fullness and completion. It was only in view of this culmination of God's rule and restoration of all things that we can really understand God sending Jesus into the world and the work that Jesus did. In this morning's text from Isaiah 2, the prophet Isaiah paints this beautiful picture of the future, promising restoration for a ravaged Jerusalem and a new model of peace. But it's only going to be in those last days, a timeline that was certainly vague and unknown. Yet the vision was clear, a vision that reflected God's desire for the world to be restored. It is a vision where all these nations will walk. In fact, the people will almost run to the mountain of the Lord to be taught the ways of God and to be invited to walk in the path of God. A vision where justice and peace will prevail, not injustice and war. This vision that we like as Mennonites to use, the swords being beaten into plowshares and the spears into pruning hooks. This vision that's so artistically recreated by Mennonite artist Esther Augsburger, who constructed a 16-foot steel plow blade with 3,000 guns welded into its shape. We continue to long for this vision where there will no longer be wars between nations. In view of this day, the descendants of Jacob are to wait and to look forward to that future day. And in the meantime, they're invited to come and be active and walk in the light of the Lord and live into this vision of restoration that is certain, but not immediate, that is sure, but not yet. In Matthew 24, Jesus issues a similar promise to his disciples concerning his own return. As he gives his final instructions to his disciples, he tells them that his return is certain, but it is on a timeline unknown even to himself. Jesus doesn't want his disciples trying to figure out when that time will come, but rather he directs their attention to how to live in the present time. He tells them, keep watch and do not be lulled into complacency in the normal activities of life. To make this point, he points to the time of the big flood, the time of Noah, when the people were simply going about their business as usual, their daily routine, eating and drinking, and not really paying attention to what was going around them. And suddenly they were taken away as the waters rose. Jesus then goes on to give a couple of other examples of people going about their normal routine, right? The man in the field and the women grinding at their hand mills. In the mundaneness of the routine of life, suddenly one is taken and one is left. In today's culture, the apocalyptic outline for the return of Christ that gets quite a bit of attention has been popularized in the Left Behind book series. Some of you may be familiar with those. In this series, there's an assertion that when this event called the rapture occurs, Jesus will take the faithful with him and the unfaithful will be left behind. But if we look at Matthew's view here in this passage, we have the complete reverse of that. As the flood took away the unfaithful and left behind the faithful saved with Noah in the ark, so too will it be when Christ returns. Two will be in the field. The unfaithful one will be taken away and the faithful one will remain. The two working at the mill, the unfaithful one will be taken away and the faithful one will be left behind to continue to do the work. Of course, Matthew is speaking metaphorically here, not literally predicting what will actually happen at the end. Matthew is trying to impress upon his readers that they are meant to live faithfully in the here and now, in view of what the future holds. To be faithful means being active participants in doing God's will on earth as it is in heaven. To be faithful means to do more work, that there is more work to be done while we wait. If we had continued on in the rest of Matthew 24 and 25, Matthew gives us more examples, more scenarios of how to be faithful. In the next verses, right after what was read, Jesus talks about a slave who is faithful while the master is gone and is rewarded with more responsibility, in contrast with the unfaithful slave who finds himself facing a judgment with weeping and gnashing of teeth. The next scenario that Jesus gives contrasts the 10 wise bridesmaids who brought enough oil to accompany the groom, in contrast to the foolish ones who are unprepared and are abandoned when the bridegroom arrives. This idea that the choir sang about, right? Being ready, keeping your lamps trimmed and burning. Jesus goes on to describe slaves faithful in managing 5 and 2 talents, being rewarded with double responsibility in contrast with the slave unfaithful in managing even 1 talent. And then at the end of chapter 25, Jesus describes the righteous who feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, clothe the naked, care for the sick, and visit the imprisoned. These righteous ones are in contrast to the unrighteous who fail to offer these acts of kindness. The righteous are left behind to inherit the reign of God, where there is more work to be done. Faithfulness begins in the here and now. It's time to start living right now, because whenever the end comes, that's when it will come, in the present time. Since it is impossible to predict at what point in the late night the thief might come, the homeowners must focus on being thoroughly prepared for the event, irrespective of when the thief arrives. So we must be vigilant and prepared for each moment in the here and now. It is time to live fully as God intends for our lives to be. It is time to stop living in the past, wishing things were like they used to be, or living with regrets of what could have been. So refuse to live yesterday over and over. Lean into the future unafraid. Move forward towards God's vision of restoration. Now, this is difficult. It's difficult when the world around us seems so far from Isaiah's vision of peace. A world infiltrated by evil, where hatred is on the rise and peace cannot be found. A world filled with broken relationships, perhaps an unwanted diagnosis, more mass shootings, and so much uncertainty. It's easy to become afraid and overwhelmed by all that is not right in our world. But amid all the uncertainty around us, Jesus calls us to lean into the certain future that God has planned. God is already at work, transforming the world, so wake up and see what's happening. Pay attention to the hints and glimmers of hope shining through the darkness. Watch for the unfolding of God's restored vision coming to life among us. Seattle Mennonite Church is one example of a congregation living into such a vision. The church has recently entered into an agreement with Community Roots Housing to tear down and redevelop its church property to create about 250 affordable housing units in a pair of 6 or 7-story buildings. This project has been decades in the making. Seattle Mennonite formed in the late 1960s. For many years, this congregation has been working diligently to live in the community with its neighbors, building relationships together, and have been able to hire a paid staff person to lead this community ministry. Over the years, as housing costs have soared in the city, they were confronted with unhoused people in their neighborhood, and they saw a great need for affordable housing. Years before, the congregation had been able to purchase an old movie theater, which they converted into their worship space, and some classrooms, but the space felt cramped for what they needed. And in subsequent years, with a significant gift from a wealthy donor, they were able to purchase neighboring buildings to expand and add space for offices and classrooms, and to also lease space to other nonprofit organizations. The church administrator noted, "We were assembling a church campus over 25 years with the idea that eventually it would be revealed to us how to meet our community's needs. And that time has now come for them. Because of the relationships they have built in the community, they are now able to sell their property to support this affordable housing project. The church will be able to develop their own church space in the years to come in the new building, and are in the process of working with an architect on designing their sacred space alongside flexible space for gatherings throughout the week. Seattle Mennonite Church, seeing needs in their community, building relationships, and with patient waiting, are living into God's vision for people to live in peace. Faithfulness is an involved and continuing journey where we will always be learning and looking for ways to transform the world around us. It involves keeping God's vision before us and partnering with God to become instruments of peace and abundance and generosity and provision. It entails living attentively in the here and now with a commitment to the welfare of others. And it means watching for how God is already at work and rejoicing that we can participate in the divine work of restoration and transformation. Jesus is always coming and showing up in our world. Keep watch, for he may appear just around the corner. He may appear to be the neighbor down the street, or the woman who lives down the hall, or the friend who is alone. Keep awake, for Jesus never tires coming into our world. In this Advent season, may we wait with certainty in God's dream for restoration of our world. May we watch with expectancy to see God already at work. And may we live faithfully, working in the here and now. May it be so.